Hey guys, welcome to another installment of Picture Dorian Gray, and we'll be talking about Chapter 6. First thing we should mention about Chapter 6 is it has two kind of parts of the chapter. The first one is with Basil and Lord Henry, and then the second one is Basil, Lord Henry, and Dorian. So at the beginning of the chapter, Henry comes in to talk to Basil, and they start talking about marriage, and mainly talking about Dorian's engagement. What we see here is we see Henry's attitudes towards marriage. We've talked about it in the past chapters, but at this point we really see his attitude towards it. He finds it pointless, he finds it unnecessary. He talks about engagements being, he actually mentions, I remember being married, but I don't remember engagements perhaps. And what he's really addressing here is that he doesn't see the point in a sacrificial relationship. He believes that the whole point of life is to pursue one's own aspirations and pleasures, and therefore there's no place for any type of relationship that would cause one to sacrifice everything for the other. We see that more in the later half with Dorian and him having a conversation about what is the point of life and what do we need to strive for. And so Basil and Henry's conversation is kind of this conversation about Dorian and whether Dorian is going to change because of this sudden engagement. It's important to note that Basil also has these feelings of frustration with the fact that Dorian is now engaged to a woman, because we have that interaction where Basil's attracted and infatuated with Dorian, and so we have that almost love triangle dynamic in play. So later on in the chapter, we have Dorian coming in to talk to Henry and Basil, and at this first part of this interaction, we see is Dorian is extremely happy. He goes, "Why won't you congratulate me? We need to go to the theater so you guys can meet my fiance." And the important thing here is we come to this conflict of interest, mainly with what Lord Henry wants and what Dorian seems to be doing. We know up to this point, Lord Henry has had a very close and tight grip on Dorian. Anything he said with his philosophies, Dorian enacted. He was an innocent boy at the beginning of this book, and even though we're still early on in the chapters, we start to see this adjustment, more of a superficial and aesthetic focus on life. What's important about this earlier interaction is that Dorian starts mentioning his love towards Sybil. That's important for two ways specifically. The first one being the superficiality of the relationship. There's a quote where he goes, "Oh, when will you see her next?" And he goes, "I saw her last in the forest of Arden, and I will see her next in the garden of Verona." What does that mean? He's talking about plays. I saw her last in this play, and I will see her again in this play. He's representing that he doesn't actually know the woman very well. This is supposed to be a witty interaction for the reader. The reader is supposed to realize, oh wait, he's attracted to what she is aesthetically, but not really anything of substance for her. We have Lord Henry in an earlier part of the chapter talk to Basil about her being an actress. What we have to know about the Victorian period is actresses were not seen as celebrities as they are today. They were not of a higher class. Therefore, when they were talking about the social class of Dorian and the actress Sybil Vane, they're mentioning, oh, I hope they don't get married because that would be almost social suicide or a social faux pas. With that relating to Dorian, he does not see her as an actress. He sees her as this figure of beauty. So the second part to that is that he claims to be madly in love with her, and that this love will be much stronger than anything that Lord Henry could do to influence Dorian. He mentions this several times. He says, well, I'm in love with her, I'm gonna marry her. Lord Henry says, hey, you shouldn't get married to her. And he goes, no, I'm going to do what I want, essentially. This is the first instance where we see Dorian having this conflict with Henry. Up until this point, we see several instances of Lord Henry having this emotional and intellectual grasps on Dorian. So the fact that Dorian is breaking away from this is a thing to note. What it possibly represents is that this lust or love idea that Dorian has experienced is stronger than any intellectual thought. Therefore, love perhaps transcends this hedonistic lifestyle. The second thing is that Dorian says that he does not want the philosophies anymore. Not only does love overshadow these philosophies, but he's figured it out and he has no purpose for Lord Henry. Lord Henry then comes back and they start having a philosophical conversation with Basil, Dorian, and Henry. And what he mentions is that the purpose of life is to find happiness. He quotes and says, a happy life is always a good one, but a good life is not always happy. So what he's saying is that when you get yourself involved in other people and not on your own individual happiness, then you're missing the point of life and you're going to live, you might live a good life, but it's not happy. And if it's not a happy life, then what's the point? He then tries to convince Dorian of this, and again, there's this conflict, and Dorian goes, well, how about you go to see her? Once you experience her beauty in these plays, you'll understand why I'm madly in love with her. Henry and Basil agree. And then what's interesting is we have Basil having to drive himself to the theater, whereas Henry and Dorian go into a separate car to the theater. So what is important about this chapter? What should we take note of? What's important is that we should call into question the philosophies of Lord Henry. We have been, however, now let's see, how does Dorian react to this? Is he able to be independent, or does Henry have still some influence on him? Will this love that Dorian claims to have be sustaining, or will it crumble when he meets her not as a character? Remember, there's been about 3 or 4 interactions at this point, and they have yet to talk in any situation other than purely kissing. We have this instance where he talks about kissing her in the mouth and being a white rose and all this romantic imagery, but we don't have any substance at this point. We saw Sybil's interaction, and she cares about the social status, and of course they mention it in the veil of love. But she is more focused on this societal influence, and Dorian's so focused on the aesthetic influence. And is that a steady way for a relationship to be? And on the more conceptual level, is that love at all? What we have here is Wilde is making a commentary on the idea of love as well as in relation to the hedonistic worldview. He mentions through the lens of Lord Henry that the point of life is happiness, and true love is sacrificial. Therefore, it's better to have lust of several people than love with just one. So that's where we're going to leave off for this week on chapter 6. Next week we'll be doing some other chapters to continue on in this book with some analysis and summaries. So with that, have a great rest of your week.